The night before my brother's engagement party, the building's night security guard knocked on my office door at 9:47 p.m. and said very quietly, "Don't leave yet. I need you to hear something first." I almost laughed. My name is Iris. I'm 31 years old. I'm the kind of person who color codes her calendar and keeps a backup of every important document in 3 different places. I don't do dramatic. I don't do cloak and dagger. I was still at the office because I had a client presentation the next morning, and I was the type of person who over-prepared for everything, which, as it turned out, was the only reason any of this ended the way it did. His name was Victor. He'd worked the night shift in our building for 6 years. I knew him the way you know someone you see 3 times a week at 10 p.m. when you're both pretending you'd rather be somewhere else. He brought his own thermos. He had a daughter in grade 7. He always held the elevator. He said, "There are 2 men in the parking garage, level P2. Your brother is one of them. I heard your name." I told him I was sure it was nothing. He looked at me the way people look at you when they know something you don't, and they're not sure how to hand it over gently. He said, "I've been doing this job a long time. It's not nothing." So I followed him, down the stairwell, not the elevator, to a utility door that opened into a back corridor of the parkade. The concrete smelled like exhaust and cold rain. November in Vancouver does that. It gets inside everything. Victor pointed to a gray support pillar. I could hear the acoustics shifting the way they do in underground spaces, voices carrying farther than they should. He positioned me behind a ventilation unit and gave me one slow nod. Then he stepped back and became invisible the way people who are very good at their jobs sometimes do. My brother's voice first, then another man's, lower, deliberate. They were talking about me. Not in the way you hope your family talks about you, not the way that makes you feel seen or loved or even mildly appreciated. They were talking about me like I was a line item, an obstacle, a problem that needed to be managed before Tuesday morning. I stood there in my coat and my work heels on a concrete floor, and I stopped breathing. For context, my father built a mid-sized commercial real estate company in Vancouver over 25 years. He had a stroke 14 months ago. Nothing catastrophic. He recovered most of his mobility, most of his speech. But his cognitive fatigue became real and permanent in the way no one talks about at discharge. He could still chair a board meeting. He just couldn't chair it the way he used to. So quietly, practically, without much fanfare, I became the person who kept the moving parts moving. Not officially. Not with a title change or a revised org chart. Just functionally. The way older daughters sometimes do. My brother, Elliot, was charming and well-dressed and perpetually 37 minutes late to everything that mattered. He had an MBA from a school in Ontario he mentioned slightly more often than necessary. He was getting engaged to a woman named Petra the following evening, and the party was being hosted at our parents' home in West Vancouver, and I had personally called the caterer, confirmed the florist, arranged a car service for my parents' closest friends who no longer drove at night. The other man in the garage was Petra's father. I recognized his voice from the one dinner we'd had together in September. Confident, the kind of man who never quite makes eye contact because he's always scanning the room for someone more useful. What I heard over the next 22 minutes changed the shape of my understanding of the previous 14 months. The restructuring documents my father had signed in August, the ones I'd helped prepare, the ones I believe were standard operational updates to reflect my increased functional role, had been drawn differently than I was told. I'd been given a summary, not the document itself. The document itself, apparently, had been drafted by Petra's father's corporate attorney and reviewed only by Elliot. My father had signed them during a period of particular cognitive fatigue, a Tuesday afternoon after a long physio appointment. I remembered that day. I had offered to be there. Elliot told me it was just routine paperwork, nothing that required both of us, that he'd handle it. I let him. The operational authority I thought I had, The signing power, the vendor relationships, the right of first review on any asset transfers had been quietly reassigned, not to Elliot outright, to a numbered company, one I had never seen mentioned. One that, as I would discover later, had been incorporated 3 weeks before my father's stroke. After the engagement, Petra's father said, "The transfer of the Burnaby portfolio completes." Elliot said she won't see it coming. She thinks the August documents gave her more authority, not less. Petra's father made a sound that was almost a laugh. He said, "That's the beauty of it." There it was. I had spent 14 months holding the company together, renegotiating a lease in Richmond that saved my father $400,000, rebuilding a vendor relationship in Surrey that Elliot had damaged with a missed call and a worse email, managing the refinancing of 2 properties when rates were climbing and everyone was panicking. I had done all of this while my father recovered and my mother focused on him, and my brother attended networking events and posted on LinkedIn about leadership. And the entire time, I had been the scaffolding around a demolition. Victor was waiting in the corridor when I came back through the utility door. He didn't ask me anything. He just looked at me and said, "I'm sorry. I thought you should know." I nodded. I said, "Thank you. I meant it in a way I don't think I've meant a thank you since." I went back upstairs. I sat at my desk. I did not cry, not right then, because there is a particular kind of pain that doesn't arrive as tears. It arrives as clarity, sharp and total and almost quiet. I opened my laptop. I had dual access to the company's document management system because I had personally implemented it 18 months ago and insisted on administrative permissions for continuity. Elliot thought this was me being particular. He wasn't wrong about the particular part. I pulled every document signed between April and August. I cross-referenced the numbered company registration against the corporate registry. I found the name of the attorney. I found the draft agreement that referenced the Burnaby portfolio transfer. I found the timeline. And then I found something they had not considered, a clause I had inserted into the vendor services agreement the previous spring because I had done the vendor contract revisions. Because Elliot had been in Tofino for 2 weeks and my father wasn't up to it. A clause that required written authorization from the original operational signatory before any renegotiation, transfer, or suspension of services could proceed. That was me. It had been me for 18 months. They hadn't stolen leverage. They had stolen a building that still had my name on the locks. I went to the engagement party the next evening. Of course I did. I wore a navy dress I'd bought in the summer and never worn. I helped my mother with the flowers when the florist arranged them slightly asymmetrically, and she couldn't stop looking at it. I shook Petra's father's hand and said it was wonderful to meet him properly, which was technically true. I told Elliot he looked good, which was also true. He did. He always did. That was sort of the problem. Petra was kind, actually. I want to say that because it matters. She was warm and a little nervous, and she touched Elliot's arm when she talked about their future with a genuineness that I chose to believe was real. She had nothing to do with her father's arrangements. I kept those things separate in my mind. My father gave a toast. His speech was shorter than it used to be. He tended to lose the thread of longer thoughts now, and he knew it, and he'd made peace with it in the way he'd made peace with a lot of things since the stroke. He said he was proud. He said the family was growing. He looked at me at one point, mid-toast, and smiled the way he used to smile when I was 12 and had done something he couldn't quite explain, but was quietly impressed by. I smiled back. I stayed for 2 hours. I said my goodbyes. I drove home along the upper levels and watched the city lights spread out across the water and thought about everything my father had built and what it had cost him and what I had quietly propped up without ever being asked and without ever quite asking to be seen. Then I went home and I got to work. The pain doesn't always make you loud. Sometimes it makes you very, very precise. I called a corporate attorney Monday morning. Not the family's attorney, a different one, A woman I'd been referred to twice over the years and never needed until now. Her name was Dr. Osi. She had a no-nonsense phone manner and a 15-minute intake call that felt like a very calm interrogation. And at the end of it, she said, "You have more here than you think." I said, "I know." She said, "Good. Then let's be methodical." We were methodical. The numbered company had a structural flaw. The transfer documents required authorization from the current operational administrator, language that appeared in 3 separate agreements and had not been removed, possibly because no one had read them as carefully as they should have. The vendor clause I'd inserted was clean and enforceable. The Burnaby portfolio transfer, as structured, could not proceed without my written consent, which I had not given, which I would not give. I did not call Elliot. I did not call my father. I did not send an accusatory email or show up at anyone's house or do any of the things that would have let them see me coming. On Wednesday morning, Dr. Osei filed a formal notice of authorization dispute with the Land Title Office regarding the Burnaby portfolio. Standard process. Quiet. The kind of thing that doesn't make noise until it suddenly makes a lot of noise. On Wednesday afternoon, I sent a professional courtesy email to the primary investor attached to the Burnaby transfer. I introduced myself as the current operational administrator of record. I noted that there appeared to be some outstanding documentation questions and that I wanted to flag them proactively before any formal announcements, purely as a matter of due diligence. I attached 3 documents. I was very polite. I always am. By Wednesday evening, Elliot called me 4 times. I let it go to voicemail. By Thursday morning, the investor had requested a pause on communications pending clarification of the administrative structure. The land title dispute had generated a query to the family company's primary bank. The bank, following its own protocols, flagged the restructuring documents for review given the conflicting authorization records. Elliot showed up at my apartment Thursday night. I buzzed him in because I was ready. He looked tired. That was the first thing I noticed. Not angry, tired. The kind of tired that comes when you've been running a plan, and the plan has started running away from you. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm clarifying some documentation questions." He said, "You know what I mean." I said, "I know exactly what you mean. Do you want to talk about the numbered company? Or should we start with the August documents?" He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Dad signed those. He understood what he was signing." I looked at him for a long time. I said, "On a Tuesday afternoon after physio, when he was exhausted, with an attorney you chose and a summary you prepared and without me in the room, which you specifically arranged." He didn't say anything. I said, "I have been holding this company together for over a year, Elliot. Not because anyone asked me to, because Dad built it and it mattered and I couldn't watch it fall apart while he was sick. You knew that. You used it." He said, "You were never going to let go of it anyway." And there it was. The thing under the thing. The reason they'd needed the maneuver in the first place. Not just ambition. Resentment. The particular resentment of someone who watched a sibling do something well and felt diminished by it. I said, "Maybe not," but that was my choice to make. He left without resolving anything. That was fine. Resolution wasn't what that conversation was for. My father called me Friday morning. His voice was careful in a way that told me Elliot had spoken to him. He said, "Can we talk?" I said, "Of course." I drove to West Vancouver and sat at the kitchen table where I'd done homework for 18 years, and I let him ask his questions. He asked if I was trying to hurt the family. I said no. I said I was trying to make sure the family's assets weren't transferred out of legitimate control through documents signed during a vulnerable period with incomplete information. He was quiet for a while. The kitchen was warm. My mother had made tea. She wasn't drinking. He said, "I trusted Elliot to handle it." I said, "I know." So did I. That landed somewhere. I could see it. My mother, who had not said anything, reached across the table and put her hand on mine. She didn't say anything either. but she left her hand there. By the following Tuesday, Petra's father's attorney had made contact with Dr. Osei. They wanted to discuss options. Dr. Osei told me afterward that his tone had shifted significantly from what she imagined it had been the previous week. The investor formally withdrew from the Thursday announcement pending governance clarification. One of the Burnaby property managers who had received a notice of ownership query from the Land Title Office called me directly. Because I was still listed as the operational contact in every vendor agreement, to ask what was happening. I told him there were some internal documentation questions being resolved and that operations would continue as normal. He said, "Okay, should I call anyone else?" I said, "No, you can call me." I was still the name on everything that actually ran. The settlement meeting was at Dr. Osei's office, not a neutral location. That was deliberate and she had suggested it. Glass walls, good coffee, 2 paralegals present taking notes. Elliot came with a lawyer. Petra's father did not come, which told me something. My father came alone. I had one folder on the table. I said, "I'm not here to fight over the company. I want to be bought out." The room went a particular kind of quiet that happens when people have prepared for a different conversation. I slid the folder across. Inside was a buyout proposal based on a third-party valuation I'd commissioned the previous week. Fair market value for my operational stake and the functional authority I'd exercised over the previous 14 months, calculated conservatively and documented thoroughly. Attached was a transition plan, vendor contacts, outstanding negotiations, the Richmond lease renewal coming up in March, the Surrey relationship I'd repaired, everything they'd need to actually run the thing once I was gone. And at the back, a copy of the authorization dispute filing with a note from Dr. Osei outlining the timeline for regulatory review if the matter proceeded. I said, "Approve this by next Friday. I will withdraw the authorization dispute, complete a full operational handover, and resign publicly with a statement about pursuing independent ventures. Clean exit, no narrative for anyone to manage." Elliot said, "You'd walk away from everything Dad built." I said, "I'm choosing what I take with me." My father looked at the valuation figure for a long time. Then he looked at me. He said, "I didn't know about the numbered company, not all of it." I believed him. That was the hardest part, believing him and knowing it didn't change what had happened. I said, "I know, Dad." He nodded, very slowly, the way he did now when he was tired and trying to hold on to a thought. He said, "You deserved better from us." I didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would have fit inside that moment. The funds transferred the following Thursday. Dr. Osei confirmed receipt at 2018 p.m. I read the notification on my phone sitting in a coffee shop on West 4th, holding a cortado I'd barely touched, watching it rain on the street outside. I resigned the same afternoon. The statement was exactly what I'd proposed. Independent ventures, new chapter. The family company thanked me for my contributions. Very professional, very clean. Elliot texted that evening, just okay. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, because I had already decided that okay was enough. My father called the following Sunday, not about business. He asked how I was doing. We talked for 23 minutes about a documentary he'd been watching about coastal erosion, which he found genuinely upsetting. I told him about a property in Squamish I'd been looking at. He asked good questions. It felt, for most of those 23 minutes, like the version of us that existed before all of it. I don't know what happens to the company. That's not mine to track anymore. Victor got a thank you card and a gift card to a restaurant in Yaletown that his wife had apparently been wanting to try. It felt inadequate. Maybe it was. But he texted back a photo of the reservation confirmation with 3 exclamation marks, which suggested it was at least something. I've thought a lot about why he said anything. He didn't have to. It wasn't his problem. He could have watched me leave that building and gone back to his thermos and his monitors and his quiet, competent job, and never said a word. He knew my name from the sign-in sheet. He knew my face from 3 nights a week for years. He made a choice that cost him nothing materially and could have, if things had gone differently, cost him more. People who work quietly and watch carefully tend to see things that other people miss. I think he saw something in the way Elliot spoke in that parking garage that told him this wasn't nothing, and he chose to hand it to me anyway. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not the legal filings, not the buyout, not even the moment my father said I deserved better. The moment a man I knew only as a familiar face in a corridor decided that what he'd overheard was mine to know and came upstairs to find me. The rest I could have figured out. I'm good at figuring things out. That was apparently always the problem. But without that knock on my office door at 9:37 on a November night, I would have walked into that engagement party and toasted my brother's future and driven home on the upper levels and never known that the ground had already been cut out from under me. I don't have a title at any company right now. I have capital and time and a very good attorney on retainer and a clear view of what I'm capable of when I stop holding things up for other people. The Squamish property is under review. I have 2 meetings next week with investors I chose. I make my own coffee in the morning, and I don't check anyone else's calendar. And for the first time in 14 months, I am building something that has only my name on it. They thought I was the scaffolding. Turns out I was the architect. I keep thinking about the thermos. Victor brought the same one every shift. Silver, dented slightly on one side. I'd noticed it for years without ever really thinking about it. The way you notice things about people you see regularly but never quite see. He was just the night guard, the man who held the elevator. And then one November evening, he walked upstairs and knocked on my door and handed me back my own life. That's the thing about actions taken quietly without applause. They tend to matter more than the ones performed in front of an audience. What happened to me? What Elliot and Petra's father built over those 14 months while I was busy holding everything together couldn't have worked without my own willingness to trust without verifying. I signed documents I didn't read in full because I believed the people handing them to me. I stepped back from meetings I should have attended because I didn't want to seem like I was hovering. I made myself smaller in spaces where I had every right to take up room. That wasn't naivety exactly. It was a choice I made repeatedly, and I have to own that. There's a version of this story where I tell myself I was simply betrayed and leave it there, but that version isn't quite honest. The betrayal was real. So was the opening I gave it. What I learned, not comfortably, not quickly, is that integrity isn't just about how you treat people. It's about whether you hold yourself to the same standard of clarity you expect from others. I have been meticulous about the company's documents, the vendor contracts, the lease renewals. I was careless about the documents closest to my own interests because caring about them felt like distrust. It felt like accusing the people I loved of being capable of what they turned out to be capable of. Discernment is not the same as suspicion. I understand that now. Asking questions, reading the fine print, insisting on being present when your name is on something that isn't paranoia. It's the basic responsibility you owe yourself. The intelligence I'd applied to every other corner of that company, I had withheld from my own position within it. That was the real gap. And then there's the part that's harder to name. The part about continuing. About sitting at a dining table at 2 in the morning with your heels off and your makeup still on and deciding to be methodical instead of broken. Elliot was counting on me not having the will to go through it. Petra's father was counting on the same thing. They had read my capacity for loyalty and mistaken it for a limit on my capacity for action. They were wrong. I don't think I'm remarkable for what I did. I think I was pushed far enough that something in me that had been patient for a very long time simply stopped being patient. But I also think the quality, the ability to keep going when it would be so much easier to accept the loss and walk away quietly, is something worth recognizing in yourself. Not as pride, just as information. You are more capable of rebuilding than you've probably been given credit for, possibly including by yourself. Victor got a thank you card. It was not enough. It will never quite be enough. But I think he understood what I was trying to say, which is that the smallest acts of integrity, choosing to tell the truth to someone who needs it, even when it costs you nothing obvious and earns you nothing guaranteed, are sometimes the ones that change everything. I'm still learning how to build something that's only mine. It's quieter than I expected. Some days that feels like loss. Most days it feels like the first honest thing I've done in a long time.